On this week's episode of You Asked, why don't 4K Blu-rays take better advantage of the HDR capabilities in today's TVs? A quick clinic on how you can become an ace troubleshooter and figure out what's wrong with your system yourself, and a brand new segment I'm going to call Feeding the Trolls with Medicine. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Caleb Dennison, and this is episode 59 of You Asked, the show where I answer questions you asked in hopes that I can help you and others with similar tech questions. If you've got a question for me, please email it to youasked@digitaltrends.com, and we'll see if your question gets picked to be answered on the show. So this week, I got a lot more questions than usual from folks who are having some kind of trouble with their home entertainment setups, seeking some assistance in figuring out what must be wrong after making some efforts themselves to sort it out and just coming up stumped. Now, it's in my nature to want to help every single one of you experiencing problems because A, I'm just a really nice guy. And humble, don't forget humble. But also, B, I get a rise out of performing the detective work that goes into troubleshooting a problem, and I really enjoy solving that problem, even if the solution isn't going to be good news. I mean, I suck at diagnosing and repairing cars, but I know I would enjoy the heck out of being a mechanic. But like a good mechanic who's going to do a way better job diagnosing car problems when they can actually, touch the car, it's really tough to figure out AV system issues remotely. And I know this because I spent several years doing over-the-phone tech support in which the person on the other end of the line had to be my eyes, ears, and hands. And that process can take hours, not just minutes. And I just don't have that kind of time in my current role here, which sucks because I'd really like to help. But then I realized the best thing I could probably do right now is offer some troubleshooting tips that, at the very least, could help narrow down the list of potential problems and, at best, lead you to figuring out a solution yourself. So with that in mind, here's a super quick clinic on how to become a better troubleshooter in just a few steps. And folks, if you like the idea of a full video on how to better troubleshoot your AV system, drop me a comment right now, and if we see enough interest, I will absolutely make that video. So let's get into how to be a better troubleshooter, and I'll say now that some of these things might sound obvious once you hear them, but you'd be surprised how often folks miss steps when they're feeling frustrated or intimidated by their gear. We'll start with a couple of example emails that came into the channel. One is from Dilithium1701, clearly a fellow Star Trek fan, who says they've gone through 4 different 4K Blu-ray players and every single one of them has shown the same issue. They describe it as discs freezing. It's random and inconsistent. Doesn't matter if it's Blu-ray or DVD. The disc freezes one day, but the next day it plays through no problem. And this happens on brand new discs, so it's not a disc condition issue. And they point out that they have really good HDMI cables, and they're pretty sure that's not the problem. Another question came in from Paul Hibbs from Staffordshire, England, who said that they have a Samsung QN95A paired to a Sonos Beam Gen 2, and they're getting these weird audio dropouts. Well, maybe not completely dropping out, rather the sound takes a radical dive in volume. That's kind of how it read anyway. A reboot or a power cycle often fixes it, but they go on to explain that, and I'm quoting here, when set to eARC, the sound will randomly drop to nothing. But when in HDMI mode, the sound never drops, but they don't get that sweet Dolby Atmos. Now, I don't understand that narrative exactly. eARC I get, we know how that works, but what is HDMI mode? I don't have a Samsung TV setup and I haven't memorized like every menu setting, so I'm sure the answer is obvious to a Samsung TV owner, but you know what? The way we approach figuring this out doesn't really change. So let's use these 2 examples to illustrate a troubleshooting principle that you can use at home to get closer to figuring out the problem. It's a seemingly simple concept, but how you go about doing it makes all the difference. For Dilithium1701, the skipping discs guy, they said they've gone through 4 different 4K Blu-ray players, which indicates to me that the problem likely isn't the player. Like, the disc itself is probably not skipping. It's not a reading the disc issue. So we can probably rule that out, or at least toss it to the very bottom of the list of possible causes. The first thing that comes to my mind is that if it isn't the disc, and it isn't like the mechanics of the player, then what's left? Well, the most obvious culprit to me is an issue with the TV. So how can we test that theory? Well, take the disc player to another TV and see if the problem continues. If it does not, then the issue is likely with the TV. Now, what exactly it is in the TV that's causing the problem is yet to be determined, but the fact that we've narrowed it down to the TV itself saves tons of time and effort moving toward a solution. Likewise, if it did continue on a second or even third TV, ideally a different brand or at least a different model of TV, then we have to go back to the player. And since we know 4 different players did it, then we'd want to look at some of the audio and video output settings that could be tripping things up because, again, not likely to be the disc or the player itself, but what it's putting out that's the actual problem. Now, for Mr. Hibbs in England, again, we want to narrow down the list of suspects. We do this by putting a different soundbar on the TV and by putting a different TV with the soundbar. Now, I know that doesn't sound easy, but if you don't own multiple TVs and/or soundbars, that's when you need to phone a friend. Take your soundbar to somebody else's TV and run a quick test. Does the audio drop out at your friend's house on their TV? The problem followed the soundbar, so it's probably something to do with the soundbar. If it didn't follow the soundbar, then it's likely the TV, but you can confirm that theory by using a different soundbar with that TV. Again, maybe you borrow a friend's. And if there are no audio dropouts, it's probably the soundbar that's causing the issue. But if there are dropouts, the problem stayed with the TV. So it's likely the TV that's the culprit. Now, I know that's a lot, so let's break it down more simply. The more components that you have active in a system, the more points of failure you have. You need to start eliminating them one by taking them out of the loop. If taking something out of the loop makes the problem go away, you can now focus your attention on that one thing. We can also swap in replacement devices to see if the problem follows a certain device. Now, on both of these cases, I haven't arrived at a final answer for what's causing the problem. All I've done is help narrow things down, but we've narrowed them down significantly. There's definitely going to be more digging that you need to do, but before you call tech support or fire off an email to somebody like me, if you can narrow things down to a very short list of suspects, that's going to help someone drill down to the truth much, much faster. And as a matter of fact, it might get you so close that you end up figuring it out yourself. Now, obviously, troubleshooting can get a lot more involved and complex. For example, I have a lesson on following the signal path that I think would be helpful, but that would be part of a longer troubleshooting clinic video, so let me know what you think about that video idea down in the comments. Next question comes from Kyle Dickinson, and I love this one because I'd never really considered it before, but it's kind of fascinating. Kyle writes in wondering why 4K Blu-ray versions of big Hollywood titles don't take better advantage of the HDR capabilities of today's TVs. They cite some really interesting data that, for now, I'll presume is accurate, such as Top Gun Maverick maxes out at 617 nits. Oppenheimer never goes above 200 nits. And even the animated flick Inside Out 2 maxes out at 500 nits, even though there are a bunch of TVs on the market now that can go well brighter than that. And Kyle theorizes that creators might be concerned about TV's HDR tone mapping abilities and that the movies might look bad if they get rendered incorrectly. So Kyle, I have some well-educated theories I'll share, but I'll also mention that I've reached out to Maxine Gervais, who's a masterful colorist and HDR grader, and once I've had a chance to talk with her about this, I'll circle back on this with official word from someone who does the exact job that we're talking about here. Most of what I know about this actually comes from meeting Maxine at an event that LG hosted a couple of years ago. I've taken what she shared at that event and made some extrapolations based on the knowledge that I got from that, and I guess we'll see how close I get to the truth. Now, I know for certain that there are some film directors who want their art to make as few deviations from the original theatrical release as possible when it's made for home video. So in the case of Oppenheimer, I suspect that any lift in average picture level, if any at all, is done just to make some compensations for the fact that not everybody watches movies in a totally dark room. But I also imagine that director, it's a pretty serious movie, doesn't want the look of that movie changing drastically from what it looked like in the theater. I've actually heard directors say, I only need 100 nits to light a scene. And not only does that give us some insight into the practical work that's done in the film, it's indicative of an attitude that these directors have around how lighting determines the look, feel, mood, and character of their picture. I reckon that when Oppenheimer was prepared for streaming and Blu-ray, there were strict instructions given to the colorist and HDR grader not to exceed a certain threshold. And the colorist HDR grader, their work gets checked by the creator, so there's very little opportunity to sneak something through. But there's another more practical factor at play here, I think. I think a lot of folks just aren't aware that most of the content that we watch is usually sitting around the 100 to 200 nit area. The average picture level of most content lives in that zone. It's only the occasional specular highlight that really needs to punch above that level. And as you can imagine, you don't want to have a huge delta between the average picture level and a specular highlight. Otherwise, that highlight's going to be way out of balance with the rest of the picture. The times when that kind of drastic contrast would be called for are just few and far between. Like, let's take the flames in this scene of Mad Max Fury Road as an example. The director, or artist, if you will, wanted them to really leap out and seem uncharacteristically bright. That look suited the vibe of the picture, and so it works here. But can you imagine what it would look like if the fire in a living room fireplace was that bright? How much attention it would call to itself? It would look just outrageously ridiculous and out of place. That's not gonna add to the experience, it becomes a distraction. Now, those are just two of the reasons that I can imagine, though I'm betting those are the big ones. But I can't wait to talk to Maxine and learn more, which I'll share with you in a future episode. But there's just not a huge push to make the at-home release look drastically different than the theatrical release. You don't need to push specular highlights that hard to get some really stunning visuals. Now, you might be fairly thinking, but look at the aggressive HDR implementation in original shows on streaming platforms like Netflix and Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus and others. I mean, they're doing it. Yes, they are. But the big difference there is that content is being made for viewing at home on a TV. It's not headed for the theater. When you make content headed straight for the HDR TVs in folks' homes, you can master for that experience. Anyway, that's what I think. Let's see how close or how far off I was in a week or two. Also, any of my viewers who are in that business, please feel free to weigh in with what you know, and I'll shout you out in the follow-up. Now we come to a new segment of the show that I'm just gonna call Feeding the Trolls, and I'm calling it that because, well, I don't have a better idea for now. But also, that's the risk I'm taking here. You don't want to feed the trolls because they have a huge appetite for attention, and once they know where they can get their feed, they're likely to come back time and again. I've enjoyed, for over a decade now, a very civil, thoughtful, kind, considerate, and honest audience participating in the comments section. We occasionally get the odd deviation from that norm, but for the most part, this channel has been like an oasis in an otherwise very dark internet forum. Sometimes, though, I do see comments that are so off base or just plain wrong that I have to weigh in, especially if it involves character assault on my team. I just won't stand for that. With that in mind, I want to talk about some of the comments that I saw on our recent announcement for our new memberships program. Now, I tried to address some of the comments with a comment of my own, which reads, "Hey everyone, seems like there's some confusion about memberships, so I want to clarify. Memberships get you bonuses and perks. Nothing about the content we've always made changes. It will continue as it always has. And if you don't opt in for a membership, you lose nothing." And then I got this reply to that comment from Mike Brown 8580, who wrote, "There is no confusion. You YouTube people with crazy followers get paid already. Now you want more money. Humble yourself. Okay, now I think most folks can see this comment for what it is. I mean, there's so much wrong here. I honestly kind of don't know where to start. You YouTube people, for example. What does that mean? Well, if I give the commenter the benefit of the doubt here, which I feel like is a huge stretch, I can imagine they meant larger YouTube channels that get lots of views. And you can fairly infer that more views equals more money. And I guess what they're trying to say is that we are rolling in dough already and that this memberships thing is just a money grab. Now, my knee-jerk reaction is to point out that this person clearly didn't do the math on how much YouTube pays for views, probably isn't familiar with the size of Digital Trends as a publication or the size of the team involved in running this channel, and has clearly made a wild extrapolation based on this popular notion that YouTube creators are just out here raking in millions of dollars. But let's set that aside and focus on this idea that memberships are a money grab for us. Memberships are not a money grab for us. First, as I explained in my pinned comment, we aren't changing anything about how the baseline of this channel operates. We didn't take anything away and put it behind a paywall the way that some publications do. We only added new stuff and made them perks of a membership. Second, there are perks and bonuses that can only be made available to members, and that is YouTube's setup, not ours. Badges and emojis, for example, are only available through YouTube's member program. It's not as if we could have offered those kind of things outside of memberships. Third, some of the stuff that we're offering to certain membership tiers is real value add stuff. Like, I get paid to make a baseline of content. I try to make about 3 videos a week, which is a lot. And then I have a bunch of other responsibilities. It's a more than full-time job. Now, if I'm gonna make extra content or spend hours on emails trying to help folks out as a consultant, that service has value. I don't think any mechanic should spend multiple hours a week working for free by helping people figure out what's wrong with their cars. I hate that we're even having this conversation over an opt-in program that's really designed to help bring us closer to some of our most enthusiastic and loyal supporters. I don't think we're gonna make any big bucks off of memberships. For sure, not for a long, long time. Folks, we had bringing joy and fun into folks' lives with something special in our heart. That was our motive, and no amount of accusations can change that from being the truth. I mean, y'all who have been with me for a long time, I think you know what I'm all about. So I'm just gonna let my character speak for itself. And to you, I wanna thank you again. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being kind and considerate in the comments. Thanks for making this an awesome community. If you think memberships are fun and cool, we'd love to have you join. And if not, that's totally cool too. We're gonna be here for you just as we always have. And I think you're awesome. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you like this show, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe if you'd like to see more. I can't wait to see you on the next one. And until then, here's 2 other videos I think you might like. Humble yourself.